Good evening, students. Welcome to the last lecture. Now, this will cover both the chapters, the developing countries and globalization aspects. So it'll be a longer lecture than usual. Are you ready? All right, let's start. I want to discuss globalization. Okay? Globalization. How do you define it? If you remember, I have defined it for you one time in a previous class. How did I define it? I used Martin Wolf, the associate economist or editor of the Economist magazine, farmer. And how did he define it? It's integration of markets through economies across borders, right? So it means he's defining economic globalization. There's integration means what? Connecting, adding all. It's one by one. If this is a country, this is a country, it's connected, integrating economies through markets across borders. Okay? International borders. There is also a globalization based on ideas, right? The Western idea of democracy, the Western ideas of rule of law. All these things spread. Even if throughout this class, when you see comparative politics, when ideas from one country percolates into the conscious of people in the other country and it changes, that's globalization too. Okay? Cultural globalization is there. Now the Western idea of meat consumption is spreading around the world, and that is creating a havoc in health around the world. And we're not going to talk about that, but you should know that is a factor of a detrimental factor of globalization. And globalization, the Western ideas, and also clothing and marriage, not marriage in sense, dating before marriage, all these things, the Western ideas have been spreading around the world to even Eastern cultures like India, China, South Korea, Japan, are changing in their dietary, in their clothing, everything. Okay, now let's start with 9 important points. Okay, there are so many books have been written, so much ink has been shed on globalization, but this is my 9 points I took from different authors who wrote on globalization to show the conflict between the right, political right, and the political left, or I should say conservatives and the liberals. So what are those? Let's start with democracy. Write it down. You know what democracy is because we have discussed before. And for the people, by the people, of the people, as Lincoln said, and you know the origins of it. You know what are the elements it should have. So if I ask it in exam, you have to write all those things. Elements of democracy, including separation of powers, civil liberties, civil rights, right? Free, fair elections, participation, liberty, competition, all those factors. And I assume I already mentioned freedom of press. Yes. All those factors included in it. Now let's see how globalization, the Western idea, the Western markets getting connected to other countries, changes it. So the conservatives believe that globalization actually enhances democracy because, remember, from democratic regimes, the idea of when a country is open to markets, markets will increase the wealth of people and bourgeoisie is created in a society. These bourgeoisie would like to have access to the power, so they would demand more democratic form of government. Because if it's oligarchy or authoritarian regimes, like only very few in power, but when this upper middle class, rich, wanted to have access to power, demanding for access to power is the idea. So the right supporting authors include Jagadish Bhagavati, an Indian economist, who teaches at Columbia University. And another one is Martin Wolf, who wrote his book, Why Globalization Works. And Jagadish Bhagwati wrote called In Defense of Globalization. He's an expert in trade. And then there's liberal side. There are who are going to criticize this, I'll tell you. Two of them. One is Joseph Stiglitz. He is a Nobel Prize winning economist, and he was also the World Bank chief economist. And then there is another one, an Oxford trained economist, Ha-Joon Chang. He wrote a few wonderful books. One of them is Bad Samaritans, if you're interested in checking out. And Joseph Stiglitz's book, he has written an enormous number of books. The best in globalization is Making Globalization Work. Isn't that interesting? Making globalization work, because he's saying indirectly there's things which doesn't work. Whereas in the right, Martin Wolf, Why Globalization Works. So it shows the conflict already there. Okay. Now, what is the argument of the left, the liberals? I already said the right says democracy is enhanced by free markets. The left argues when globalization is spread, when it goes to new countries, that is these same multinational companies which are going into a country which are authoritarian in nature, right? And the left are saying it's not going to create a bourgeoisie which is going to demand for more access to power. It's actually going to enhance the people who are already in power. So that it's going to entrench them, because the people who go in there give money for access to the market, money to the people in power. So those people who are in power, corruption, taking that money and stay in power. And so it's anti-democratic values it creates or enhances those rather than creating democracy is the argument. Both sides have valid points and have case studies and examples. So all these are examples I picked from different books of them and want to show you, juxtapose it. That's my job so that you don't need to go around reading all these books and putting them together. So that's democracy. The second point, write it down. If I ask what is the right and left's views on this, you have to write. Second point is environment. In environment, there are a couple of things I want you to understand. The first one is global warming. You heard of this term, right? If you don't believe in science, you won't believe in it. And that is fine. But even younger Republicans believe in global warming. It's a scientific fact. Majority of the world's scientists, Nobel Prize winning scientists, support the idea of global warming. Now, what is it? If I had to explain it in simple terms, it is the average increase in temperature around the world. Why does it happen? Even like a degree of increase will have enormous consequences. Melting of polar caps of ice, sea level rising, which will flood many of the cities which are located close to the water. Around the world, have you ever thought about it? Cities have been developed because of trade and access to water for agriculture and things. Developed London, New York, Egypt's big cities, and you go to India's big cities, anywhere you go, in Paris, so you get the picture. Rome, all this access to water and trade in those times. So this water level rises, it's going to create a havoc. Like Miami, part of Miami will be underwater with global warming, increase in water level. Now, why does it increase the temperature? Sun has been there always. Why? This is anthropogenic. That means man-made effect. It started hastening the warming of the earth. The climate change happens slowly, but dramatic changes since Industrial Revolution. Since Industrial Revolution, which happened in England, they started using coal burning, coal fossils, oil, All these are fossil fuels. What are fossil fuels? Which are plants basically buried inside earth for a long time and become fossil. It carbonize, and these carbons we take and burn and release those energies in them. Where did plant get an energy from the sun through photosynthesis. Isn't it amazing? Everything comes from there, from the sun. So this energy trapped in this coal and others, we burn them and release the carbon dioxide, CO2. When CO2 goes, it creates like a blanket-like structure around the earth. If I have to give you an analogy, simple one to a complex problem, if I'm lying down in the bed and covering myself with a blanket in a cold time and breathing it inside the blanket, soon it'll be warmer inside, right? Because the blanket is what is the CO2, what you release. Okay, now the blanket is getting thicker and thicker with more CO2 we release. And sun rays come with a particular wavelength, penetrate through the blanket. It comes inside, hit the earth. When it gets reflected from the earth, its wavelength changes, lambda. You don't need to remember the lambda. And when it goes back, it cannot go through the blanket. So it comes back into the earth and its heat energy is trapped. Are you following? The blanket could get stronger and thicker with more release of methane. Methane, what's methane? CH4, with more consumption of cow, pigs. These animals consume enormous amount of grass and corn and others we feed them, and their farts and burps have CH4, methane. That also creates the blanket effect, and it increases the overall average temperature of the earth. Are you following? Okay. So now global warming is one problem of environment. Second one is biodiversity. You could teach a whole class, and I do in international relations, teach a one section completely on biodiversity. Here, short. I'm going to give you an acronym which you could remember easily and effectively. I didn't create this acronym. My favorite biologist from Harvard, Edward O. Wilson, created this. And the man has researched on ants for 50 years, can you believe, around the world. Genius, two-time Pulitzer Prize winner. Wilson said that biodiversity destruction could be mentioned in one word, acronym, HIPPO. 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 H for habitat destruction. I for invasion of species. P for pollution. Another P for population. O for overharvesting. Okay, we'll discuss this. Habitat destruction. How does this happen? This happened, before I explain that, global warming increases around the world because of free markets going and development happens. More companies are produced and fuel is burned, used, electricity production. Electricity is needed to do the work of industries and transportation and all. So when countries develop, they release more CO2. That's a global warming effect. So the more energy requirement, they're more tapping into these fossil fuels. Now, habitat destruction happens when, for example, salmon swim up. When the river flows this way, salmon swim against it from the ocean. Matured salmons. Have you seen bears standing there and catching with their mouths? Not all salmons are eaten. Most of them survive, come here in the riverbeds, lay eggs. But say people want waterfront properties, they build, and those properties they're drilling and establishing, it actually makes these fragile eggs move away and salmon population depletes. That's one species. You might think, what's the big deal about losing one species? Atlantic cod has decreased. The bear in California flag is gone, permanently extinct. And the passerby pigeons, which used to be thick when they fly in America, it could be dark like a night because they could fly so close by in the daytime. They were gone because of people shooting it for fun, not even for meat. So habitat destruction, the salmon is not, I've just gave you one example. Another could be like every year, acres and acres of tropical forest. Tropical forest means they are found in tropical region. The most famous one is Amazon forest, right? Tropical forest is being destroyed for what? So that they could have, you got it, farming of animal growth for meat consumption, and also produce agricultural products. So these creates the destruction of tropical forest. You're like, so what? Native animals to the tropical forest will disappear if their habitats are removed. If their homes, that's where they live, they'll be gone. I'll give you an example. What's the benefit? 90% of our medicines come from like less than 3 to 4% of scratching just the surface of the tropical forest. The opiate problem, now you know what is going on in the country, in America, right? It's an addiction to a drug because painkillers given are very addictive. They found a frog which has the secretion, whose secretion is 100 times more potent than morphine, but it's also non-addictive. When they went to find these frogs in large scale and pharmaceuticals could produce this, the habitats were gone because everyday destruction happens. So we lose a large amount of scientific knowledge which will be beneficial to us because of this habitat destruction alone. But there are also other reasons. When a species is gone, destroyed, it creates a vacuum, and the vacuum is competed by other species. It's not the strongest or the biggest could dominate, the fastest evolving ones, which is, you got it, pathogens. Just like how this coronavirus mutates in a short time, species which could mutate, evolve, could fill that niche of the gap created by the species extinct. And not always, but it could become lethal to mankind. Like COVID viruses. Are you following? Coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2 to be precise. Okay. Now, habitat destruction. Invasion of species. What is invasion of species? Invasion of species is, have you seen when you're coming in the airplane, do you bring apple seeds with you? Are you having, why do they care whether I have apple seeds or any plants? Agriculture, when you're in immigration, you have to fill out. Just one person in the 19th century brought like a pudding making plant from Japan. It's called kudzu, Kudzu. Just Google it, kudzu. This is an invasive plant. When it's brought into America, it grows like a weed so fast it kills all the native plants and animals, flora and fauna. In water, they could smother fish. It causes billions of dollars loss for federal government, which is our taxpayers' money, which could be used for many other beneficial things. In the South, they say, oh, close the window fast before it creeps in. Google and click on images, you will see it has covered cars and other things. And the kudzu is just a person brought it without thinking. Rabbits taken from England to Australia, and they did not have a predator to keep them in check. Predator's job is to keep the other animals in check. Keep that in mind. And because they didn't have predator, these rabbits multiplied in large number in Australia. They eat the grass. So what, you might think? Because of losing the grass holds the top alluvial soil. This is the fertile alluvial soil gets washed down because of the rain, nothing to hold it on there, to the Marie Darling, the river, and it goes into the ocean. And so it becomes a dry land and not capable of agriculture. Okay. So consequences we cannot even think of when the British famous explorer Captain Cook went to Hawaii and brought pigs with him. The pigs contaminated with malaria spread mosquitoes from the pigs to the virgin bird species of Hawaii. Bite them and go and bite the pig and go and bite the birds. They die. 1/3 of them decimated by Captain Cook's inadvertent. It's not intentionally done. So now some people released pythons in Florida Everglades, and these pythons are taking over, Burmese pythons. Now it's becoming dangerous for all the species, including alligators and humans. And now to control them, they're saying, scientists are seeing whether they could be cooked so people could start eating and the local restaurants could serve them, the pythons. And this is how just a simple act could, around the world, $1 trillion loss because of invasion of species. Time magazine had it on the cover. You following? We're now discussing again the whole topic of biodiversity. UN recognize the year as a biodiversity year. Okay. Now, habitat destruction, invasion of species. P, pollution. The pollution we create is not just carbon dioxide or methane through our animals we domesticate for meat consumption, but also things like plastic. The plastics we throw away, marker finishes you throw away. These plastics end up in the ocean. And it's not recycled, it ends up in the ocean. You might think, oh, so what? Ocean is large. Texas is the largest state in the contiguous, one of the largest states, okay, in the contiguous states. About the size of Texas. Texas is about the size of Germany, the country, okay? And technically, all the people in the world could live in Texas. It's that much land space, in case you've never been to Texas. Texas-sized landmass of plastic floating in Pacific Ocean, multiple places. And these plastics get broken into pieces, consumed in the food by the fish, thinking they are food, and then people eat that fish, carcinogenic. There was recently, I was reading a book, it said the plastic now merging with the soil, and it gets floated to the ocean bed, and that will stay for millions of years, according to the scientist who wrote the book. And these are our pollution, what we create, and destruction of the planet. How is this related to globalization? Globalization, wherever it go, for example, this, I told you, in India, they open this and we pour ink and we'll reuse it. Now, this was when I was there 20 years ago. Now it's changing. Things are changing. So throughout the world, everybody gets rich. They want to use and throw, just like America. And that's how things get worse with polluting our earth. This is just one example of many things. Pollution. The mask people wear, they're thrown into the ocean. Not directly. You're not going to go and throw into the ocean. It ends up in the ocean. Okay? You following? So pollution happens in different forms from mankind because also of population. 7.4 billion people. You go in the 1600s, 400 years ago, New York City population is 5,000. 5,000. That's it. And now it's 8.5 million people. 5,000. Every 40 years, the population of the world doubled in the last 40 years, last 80 years. Doubled. And this now, if it doubles, we don't have resources to feed. We don't have resources to feed all the people. That is what the point. Next P is population. Population overgrowth. The population is overgrowing that to feed New Yorkers, you need arable land. Arable means like fertile land, about the size of Virginia. Not the arable land in Virginia. The entire state of Virginia land you need to feed New York City people. Are you following? And if you are talking about extra 2-3 billion, not doubling of the 7.4, not like 15 billion people, just 2-3 billion conservative estimate. You need arable land about the size of the state of Brazil. That's the largest country in Latin America. We don't have, nobody has, unless technology evolves to produce, and even then it creates externalities, side effects. I mean, before we used to use animal fertilizers, birds poop from Latin American countries for America, iguana, the bird from Peru and Chile border. Men went there to work in that smell and create, until Haber process came to create nitrogen from the air and create fertilizers. But even then now, productivity has to increase in the amount of available land to feed these mouths. Millions already have problems not able to eat. Yes, rich countries filled with abundant food and creates heart attack and stroke and all these things. But there are people still starved, malnourished. In India is one of the topmost country of children malnourished, and Africa still has. It is improving, but there are also developing countries which have long way to catch up. Are you following? Population increases, and they also want to develop. They want to live like American standards. When I came here to this country, I was surprised that the classrooms are air conditioned. When I went to college in India, I did not have air conditioned classrooms. Okay, and the entire building was air conditioned. Not New York, because it's old buildings. Go to other places, from Ohio to Florida to Texas, entire university buildings are air conditioned. Amount of power you need. Other countries are developing. They also want to have similar structures and things. The world's energy requirement is going to double. Already we are having hard time meeting it without using fossil fuels. Now more fossil fuels will be tapped in because the energy is going to double by 2040. Where's the energy going to come from? Solar and wind? Not so much, because for per kilowatt it costs more than fossil fuels. Are you with me? So population increases, it creates problems of food to development, giving them care. And population also eats on animal proteins, like from ocean food. It's depleted. Fish has declined. But in another 30-40 years, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish. That's correct. Few decades will be there, more plastic than fish. People who depend on protein in the ocean are bushmeat in Africa. That's millions of tons. A ton is 2,000 pounds of meat is consumed. You're like, so what? These are forest animals. You don't know what viruses are living with them, which could jump to the humans, and that is called zoonosis. Like zoo, zoonosis. Zoonosis, jumping, spillover, jumping from one host to another. When it jumps, just like this COVID from a bat, it will take over the world with like a pandemic. It has happened before, bubonic plagues, right? And many other pandemics. You know, the flu of 1918, yeah, swine flu and others, SARS and MERS, even the COVID family, right? When they spill over, when the consumption, it is all problem for humanity. Now we are thinking, otherwise, some people don't care about animal getting destroyed, but until it bites them in the back. Over-harvesting. We are over-harvesting all the animal species around the world. A sixth extinction is happening. What does it mean, sixth extinction? 5 large extinctions have happened in the earth. Dinosaurs died, you know, the time when an asteroid hit near Yucatan Peninsula. Yes, that's a mass extinction. Similar sixth mass extinction is happening right now, from frogs to different kinds of species. One third of the frogs gone. You might think, so what? If one species is destroyed, again, I remind you what I said, the vacuum has been filled by other species. Ecological balance is destroyed. Especially if we kill sharks for shark fin soup. When China develops economically, more want to consume shark fin soup, which is a cultural delicacy, and they cut the dorsal fin of the shark and push them aboard. The shark is a predator, apex predator, keeps the ocean clean. And if they are killed, millions get killed. Few guys get killed by shark attacks in a year, but millions of sharks get killed by us. When we kill them, sharks, okay, for example, for the fin, what happens? You're destroying the ecology, because like a pyramid, this is called Elton's pyramid. The top of the totem pole is the apex predator. That's why I call it apex, like top. And the middle is the predator eats. So if I have to take a jungle, the lions are on the top. The lion eats zebras. Zebras are more in number than lion, and the lion in the back. And the bottom is trees and plants, which are way more in number than zebras. You take out the lions and other carnivore animals, zebras will multiply in large numbers, and they will eat and destroy the plants. Will affect the ecology. You wouldn't think taking a lion out will have less amount of trees and plants. Introducing wolves into Yellowstone has changed the ecology of Yellowstone. Rivers have ran direction differently. I don't want to go into there because of the time. I just noticed I want to wrap it up. So environment problems are created. It's much complex. You could take a whole course on it and learn about it, are because of globalization. So what is the argument of the right and the left? The left's argument is wherever economy goes, Western type of economy, for more and more consumption, and some would even say greed, it creates a destruction of species and global warming. Whereas the right says we don't want government intervention to control these externalities. We could have market-based incentives. So say one, there's person two, person three different countries, assume. We come to a plan to release only 1 million tons of CO2 each of us. Okay? So say I use technologies to reduce the amount of CO2 release. Say 800 is the maximum I release. The 200 million tons, I could sell it to others who need it, and I could make money. So I use technology to reduce. If there's no cutoff, we said we will release more and more. We set incentives. So this is a market-based incentive. Okay? Cap and trade, it's called. Cap, you put a cap on the amount maximum each of us could put out, and trade. Cap and trade. Are you following? Okay. Now, let's move on to, so the difference is market-based solutions by the right, conservatives, the left is the government-based, because markets are greedy, unbridled, it doesn't deliver equality. It is more about freedom, but it's not about equality. So the third one, write it down, poverty and inequality. Poverty and inequality is the top title. Poverty is alleviated enormously in most developing countries because of globalization. The Western markets, when they went into these third world countries, like for example, when China, we talked about in post-communism, how Deng Xiaoping created this market economy, which created a flourishing of the people's entrepreneurship that unleashed growth, that China alone brought out, are you ready? 750 million, more than 750 million people out of poverty. It's close to 1 billion people out of the That's like 10% of the world's population in China alone brought out of poverty. So then the right argues, like Jagadish Bhagavati and Martin Wolf, poverty is reduced. Look, that is the capacity of globalization. And the left argues, yes, but what? It increases inequality. Remember, we talked about Gini coefficient index 0 to 1. The inequality has been increasing in America since 1980s. What happened in 1980s? Ronald Reagan's election as president, and Milton Friedman, a type of economist from Chicago School who believe markets could do good, cannot do anything bad, and government is all bad. And that is the opposite to Keynesian economics. So this unleashed a supply side economics, quote unquote, supply side economics, trickle down policies that the rich could get tax breaks and it will trickle down to the poor. It never trickles down, as we have seen. Inequality has been raised. And so that in the United States alone, the top 3 rich guys have more money than the bottom 50% of the people. That's inequality. And you know what's wrong with inequality. We have discussed it reduces political trust. As you could see already, country is more polarized. It increases political instability. As you saw, that to take office, Biden needs military around. Is this democracy or an authoritarian country? You might think, right? Are you following? Okay. Let me drink some water. Hang on a second. I don't have a small one. I gotta drink this. Now, inequality needs to be addressed with the help of government. Government's role is to reduce inequality by working to tax the rich and give Social Security benefits, security benefits like unemployment and others. Usually left-leaning governments do that. So Biden comes into office, he extends extra $1,400 for people who have already received $600. Are you following? Okay. So throughout the world, countries where inequality increases, it is not good for the society and it has to be addressed, is the argument placed by left-leaning liberal economists like Stiglitz. Fourth point, MNC and exploitation. MNC and exploitation. What is MNC? Multinational corporations, right? Multinational corporations. Now, you know Nike creates shoes around the world. And in Vietnam, they made their shoes, and many people felt that it's workers being not properly paid proper wages compared to the United States, and it's exploitation. So the left argument is it's exploitation. There's no OSHA. OSHA means Occupational Safety Health Administration in America. To make sure your workplace is safe and labor rights are there. There are laws. Third world countries don't have. So these companies go there and manufacture things cheaper by not providing all those necessary protections for laborers. The rights argument is, before we go there, they didn't even have that. We are not forcing them to work in another environment. That's the best they have. But the left feels that it is not fair to oppress them instead of giving them full benefits like what they get here in the United States. The companies take advantage. So governments have to make companies pay well for employees and treat them in a healthy work environment conditions. If you notice in all these points, the left's argument is about fairness and morality. The right's is free market. Free market doesn't seem about fairness. It sees about efficiency. It is an efficient system in delivering goods and profits, but it's not about fairness. Fairness, morality argument comes with government's role. Are you following? That's the left's argument. Now, fifth one, unfair trade. Yeah, you heard of fair trade. This is unfair trade. What is unfair trade? Unfair trade. This is, I've discussed before, when America got its independence and the British companies want to come and sell goods here, Alexander Hamilton, the first Treasury Secretary, wrote an article to the Congress, US Congress, with the title Infant Industry Syndrome. He doesn't want the huge size companies of Britain coming and competing with small infant like companies of America, because it'll be destroyed. It's like I gave you the analogy before. A heavyweight boxer allowed to fight with your child, you won't. The child will be killed. If the child really wants to be a boxer, you train, feed, make him strong, grow, give him time, and then he could fight. Then he has a chance. So to protect those companies through tariffs and other means, so you don't let these companies come in with free market, free fair trade. If they come in, they will destroy these companies before it grows. And you protect them, nurture them. The government protects and nurtures. The companies grows. When they become strong, then you could let a fair fight. Until then, you protect, is what Hamilton was saying. And the British companies did the same against French when they were small. And around the world, when countries which have power, states which have power could do that, they don't, they cannot protect, because American companies dictate, like through IMF and other means, they dictate saying like, open up. You saw the documentary, right? Life and debt. And because they signed the deal with IMF to get the loans, Jamaica has to now have a free trade. So American products come in there and destroy their economy. Are you following? Because destroy not their market in the particular products, like milk, for example. So Jamaican farmers go out of business in the milk products. And so they are consistently dependent on the American products. You following? And so the left's argument is this is unfair trade, and America, even now, chooses based on what it has advantages, what products it has advantages, it will have free trade. But when it doesn't have advantage, it won't allow. It's pick and choose. Only in the UK, during 1860s, it had all free trade. Even them, the word were started from there. They select based on their advantages. But they preach all the other countries, United States and Western countries, to open up their markets. The next one, sixth one, aid and development. Aid and development. Aid is the money given by countries to poor countries to develop. And the right-wing argument, conservative argument, is you should not give aid because aid makes them dependent continuously on the rich countries. And also it increases corruption. Remember I mentioned the guy in Congo, Mobutu Sese Seko. Yes, the pink wine, the Concorde flight, the palaces, the parties, right? Concorde flight to London for his multiple wives shopping. He siphoned $4 billion of aid money into Swiss bank personal accounts, his personal accounts. It doesn't go to the people. So the right wing doesn't want aid to be given. One, it creates dependency. Second, it creates corruption. But the left's argument is They need it, the people need it. So rather than giving it to the main guys, you could give it to non-profit organization which works on the ground with the people, and maybe creating hospitals, roads, schools could help, rather than giving us the money to the leader. A big supporter of aid is Jeffrey Sachs. He wrote a book called End of Poverty. Whereas conservative economist like William Easterly, a professor at NYU, he wrote a book called Elusive Quest for Growth. Another one, White Man's Burden, to help. White Man's Burden, it's from a poetry. You following that, how the arguments goes on both sides? One wants to don't want to give aid at all because it's squandered and corruption and it doesn't benefit the people, dependency. The other one, give it smart aid, giving it to the right ways so people today needs it. And it's not enough aid is also Jeffrey Sachs' argument. Okay. Seventh one, farmers and IMF. You saw that as a whole as a documentary. Farmers in the end, after World War II in the United States, were a poor bunch. Many of them where household income was lesser. Farmers' median household income was lesser, or half of median household income of other Americans. Now farmers' median household income is almost twice that of median household income of other Americans. Their wealth is still, they get subsidies. The subsidies started then. Subsidy is an economic incentive to produce or make them do a particular action, to continue the farmers to produce farming products so that America will not run out of farming products, especially during time of war, so we don't need to depend on other countries. That means if somebody completely surrounds us, the products, food will not come from outside, you will starve. Japan was starved like that in World War II. They were living on 1,200 calories because food has to come from outside. We were blockading United States, Japan. So we subsidize, and now farmers produce plenty because it's a subsidized. So the rate of production is, the rate cost for production is lesser. When they produce in large quantities, they go and dump them in other countries. And people say, oh, well, it's economic advantage. If you cannot compete with American products, then you should not. That's fair to lose. No, it's not fairly created product because the cost of production has gone down because it's taxpayers like you and me, which who are not farmers, paying for these subsidies. No politician is courageous to remove the subsidy, because if he removes, you will not get the votes of the farmers. Corn to soya to chicken, all these are overproduced, especially corn. That's why you see corn gets fed to animals, pigs and cows before being slaughtered, not grass. And also cornstarch even in your freaking toothpaste. Yeah. So it is IMF, through their economic imperialism, destroys other countries in the name of helping. IMF is created after World War II, International Monetary Fund, to give loans when in desperate need, to help. But this is like a loan shark. Not my argument, Stiglitz's argument. The Nobel Prize winning economist Stiglitz's argument. Globalization and its discontents. He wrote a book, and then making globalization work. So government has to step in and protect these countries from being abused by power. Okay. 8th point. Medicines and WTO. Medicines and WTO. So WTO means it's a World Trade Organization. All the countries in the world, when they do trade, they do a common dealing through the World Trade Organization. It's to regulate trade. That's why the organization's role is. And Botswana, one of the countries in Africa, right above South Africa, a relatively wealthier country compared to countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and a not bad governance, unfortunate, and have gold diamond mines. So they are using that money not for few people in the top, but for the benefit of the people there. But one third of the country is suffering from AIDS, the disease. For them to survive, they need medicines. The United States pharmaceutical companies produce these medicines, and they patent them, and they sell them at 10 to 12,000. When he wrote the book, it was 10 to 12,000 per annum. Average Botswanan cannot afford $12,000 for medicines every year. He would die. So they asked for a subsidized rate, a reduced. American pharmaceutical companies are not willing to subsidize the rate for African countries. So Brazil and India, developing countries, said we can make that in less than 10%. How much? Less than 10% price, provided American pharmaceutical companies, you allow us to violate your property, intellectual property, that medicine patented. If you allow us to manufacture it, we will use. We know how to make it in our companies and supply it to Botswanians. And these pharmaceutical companies took the case to WTO and threatened them with TRIPS, T, all capital letters, TRIP, small letter S, trade-related intellectual property rights argument. In that way, we will put an embargo. That means no trade with Brazil and India. So threatened India and Brazil. So then they backed off. So the left's argument, like Stiglitz is saying, look, they're using WTO, an international organization, to produce smooth trading to happen, but they are making it, this few pharmaceutical companies, entities, using an international organization like American to disempower countries like Brazil and India, threatening them. There are people in the right say, well, intellectual property has to be valued in order for free market to exist. True. Then there's arguments that in the name of morality, can you give? Because these people are suffering and you don't need to manufacture, you still make a lot of profit in America. You could still allow India and Brazil to make that and supply it to Botswanians. You see, the problems the institutions like WTO and IMF created to make smoother help for the third world countries are actually creating problems, making things harder for them, because powerful elements like pharmaceutical companies or farmers lobby in America is using this governmental power to crush third world countries. Are you following? Okay. Now, ninth one, sovereignty and FDI. Sovereignty and FDI. Sovereignty means, you know the word, sovereign. Complete power inside the country. They make the decisions. FDI means foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment. Countries want foreign direct investment because it's money coming in from other countries to invest in your country, and they're trying to make profit. You benefit because capital is excellent. So the rights argument is, well, before I go to right and left, I'll explain the problem. In Wall Street, people sit there and with few taps of their buttons, they could transfer money to countries which need, like if a country A needs money, and Wall Street looks at it, oh, we could make some good profit, I could go and invest there. And they'll invest. And suddenly, if there is economic winds changing in direction in the country A, and the Wall Street companies will, oh, before everything goes down in this country economically, let me pull out my money and run. So they pull out. When they're pulling out, it's already shaking building. When you pull out the bricks, what happens? It collapses. The right argues this is what business do. They go where they could make money, and they feel riskier, they will run away. The left's argument is you go in there, nothing wrong in making money, but you have to stay for the game. You cannot go into countries like China and invest and pull out when you want, because they won't let you. But I mean, they make you invest in their infrastructure, so roads to buildings and training for opportunities. That those things you cannot take it back when things are shaky. If it's just cash with the tap of switches, you will pull it out, and which creates worse situations when the economy is slowing down. So the left wants it to be regulated, to be taken care. Poor, weak government countries couldn't do it. And that makes globalization advantageous for economically powerful and not for the everyone. It's about fairness. You following? So that's what the left, like Stiglitz's argument. Now let me take a diversion. After this 9 points discussion, I want to discuss about 4 points from this very classic book, Bottom Billion, because we are talking also about developed countries, and developed countries need growth. They're developing, and they have poverty. They're struggling with poverty and trying to develop. And why sub-Saharan Africa countries have some of the most severe poverty, absolute poverty, $1.20 below per day, per person. Why? Well, according to Paul Collier, Paul is P-A-U-L, Collier, C-O-L-L-I-E-R, wrote a book called Bottom Billion. That means like in the 7.4 billion people, 1 billion people are in absolute poverty. Can you believe? I've told students, and they're always surprised. When you graduate, and say many of my students get a job, and after taxes they make $32,000 or whatever it is, say 33, round it up to 35. They make after taxes. Guess what? They are in the top 1% richest in the world. In the world. In such a young age. They're like, 1%? Really? Yeah. Go to the mirror and say, 1%. You are. Because most people don't. That's how much. But you look at in Instagram, the billionaires or millionaires in America, and think, oh, I'm not anywhere there. But you are already in the top 1%. Remember the happiness we discussed, right? After a point, it doesn't increase with increase in money. That's not me. Again, happiness research is telling the points. If it's my opinion, I always tell you as it's my opinion. Okay. So let's look at the bottom billion, why in sub-Saharan Africa, especially Paul Collier made a research and find why they are having problems. The first one, he calls it traps, T-R-A-P-S, traps, 4 different types of traps. Conflict trap. So many of the sub-Saharan African countries have civil war going in between. And when civil war goes in there, ethnic conflicts, right? When civil war goes there, Sierra Leone, Rwanda, Congo, right? It not only loses life, it loses the economy around it, because who's going to have any form of investment coming from outside in such an unstable country? And billions of dollars loss will be there, and negative growth, some other countries, negative growth. And the civil war happens. It's conflict trap. The second reason, landlocked, like a locked countries. Some other countries are in the middle, like Burundi, for example, small country surrounded by other countries, and they cannot trade with other poor countries. If you are Luxembourg in Europe, you are landlocked too, but you're surrounded by Germany and other rich countries. You could trade with rich countries, you could get richer too. If you have rich friends, you could borrow. If You're surrounded by poor friends. You can't borrow, right? Trading. And how about they go to the ocean? They can't take their goods through this other poor countries to trust their goods to reach the ocean to be transported. Landlocked countries have problems trading with the neighbor or in far away countries. So they are mired in poverty. Okay. Third reason, natural resources. Natural resources, I talked about it when I talked about elites in authoritarian regimes. Natural resources makes these people fuel civil war. Because if I'm a warlord, civil war warlord, have you heard of Joseph Kony? Okay. They made documentaries. Oprah even talked about him. A child, he had a children army. And so if I'm a warlord and I have a satellite phone and access to some oil or diamond mine, anything, I use my soldiers to capture that. And then I could call for international dealers to sell it to. In exchange, I will get money or weapons so that I could continue fighting the war. That is the idea, that there is something to exchange, sell, that will continue, pay for your war. Civil war continues. Yeah, do you know civil war is a big trap? So natural resources and gangs, warlords organize these gangs and fight over it, which destroys the economy. Of course, it's also natural resources also creates Dutch disease. That's a totally different conversation. Dutch disease is like when a country have natural resources rather than dependent on human capital and creating something. If you're just selling that product, say oil, it is going to increase. This is economic things. If you don't understand, just follow it. It is going to increase the value of your currency because, say you're selling oil in international market, it's going to bring more dollars into your country, which will increase the value of your country's currency. Because your currency value increases, production value of anything in your country will be expensive. It becomes less competitive in international market. So all your country produced exports becomes less valuable. Because it becomes less valuable, you will start depending more, or less competitive, not less valuable. Because your products produced inside the country is expensive, it won't be sold because people will buy cheaper ones. And so you will be dependent on this one thing, the oil. And so Dutch disease. So if the oil price goes up, your economy goes up. Oil price goes down, it goes with it, down with it. It's like that. Natural resources. The last, fourth reason, poor governance. Poor governance. Countries which have poor governance, authoritarian regimes, oligarchy, different types, we talked about dictatorship, they don't rule based on the consent of the people. They don't need the consent. They have any resources. They do co-optation, clientelism, corporatism. We talked about it. And so what happens, many of the sub-Saharan African countries mire in poverty because of poor governance. Governments which don't think about doing anything good to its people. So these are the four main traps according to Paul Collier. And I'm looking forward for you to learn. And before I go, I should have defined this in the beginning. You know what imperialism is, right? Imperialism. It is like to extend one's power beyond one's border. So if it's United States, if it's doing, people criticize it as doing imperialism, it extends its power. It has right to have power inside its sovereignty, sovereign boundaries. But the power emanates, goes forward and occupies territories, say. We did occupy, from Texas to New Mexico, California, everything is taken from Mexico. That's right. And We took the Cuba and Philippines during Spanish American War. Yeah, we gave it back, but we did have it for a long time, and we still have, through, in the name of lease, the prison for the terrorists, Guantanamo Bay. That's from Cuba. So this is imperialism. There's three types of imperialism: economic imperialism, cultural imperialism, military imperialism. Cultural imperialism is to use culture like Hollywood and democracy, these ideas, to say ours is good and to force those upon others. Economic imperialism is IMF, what it's doing, it did in Jamaica and other countries, World Bank, all we have, using that to beat down countries is economic imperialism. Military imperialism, we used to do that often. It's not that we haven't been doing it recently. We went and occupied Iraq. He didn't produce any weapons of mass destruction. So that's an economic military imperialism. Are you following? We did actually take over Hawaii in the 19th century through military gunboat diplomacy. It didn't belong to United States. It belonged to the Lily Colani, was the queen, Hawaiian queen. So United States have done many military imperialism and all cultural and economic imperialism. And Russia does it. Now it took over Crimea, the region, right? The world didn't say anything. Well, said, but didn't do anything. Colonialization, people use interchangeably with imperialism, but it's different. Colonialization is different. That is occupying for a long time and extracting the resources of the country, like what England did with India for almost 300 years. India was GDP wise 25% of the world's GDP. That's such a rich country. Entire Europe's GDP was not equal to that of India, approximately. England was not at all equal to India's GDP. That's how much rich India was when the British came in. When they were leaving, India was less than 5% of world's GDP. Sucked every morsel out of India. That's colonialization. And many of the African countries have colonialization history, because there's a wonderful book called Scramble for Africa. These Western countries in the 19th century went on a rampage. Oh, this is for me, this is for me. It's like people going into a free buffet and fighting, or during a Black Friday sale, rushing in and taking. These Western countries, Western European countries went in and colonized different parts of Africa. Okay. Now, I'm looking forward to your answers. Good luck.